Alrighty, welcome back in everyone to another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host as always, Tommy Brzee. It is officially after July 4th, so it is time to talk about some football. I got my Mostly Sports Football shirt right on here, so let's get into it because we got a ton to get to today. Definitely going to start to heat up the content, and today we got a great amount of stuff to get into. But let's start off with who I think can actually win the national title. That's always the question we have right around this time of year. Who are the teams that are actually in it? Who are the teams that have a real shot of lifting the trophy at the end of the year? I have about 13 here. Might be a little bit too many if I'm being totally honest. I think some of these I'm going a little bit crazy with, but at the end of the day, have my teams for that. Then we'll get into the biggest questions for each conference. There's a lot of different stuff to get into. We'll just do the major conferences today, so the SEC, Big 10, Big 12, and ACC, but we'll get into some other conferences down the road just a little bit. And then we got to get into recruiting. A lot of stuff has been going on recruiting, some different things that are going to put into question the House settlement and how enforceable a lot of these rules are, and then just some teams that are going on absolute tears right about now. But we're 46 days out from football, so let's talk about some football. And let's get into this. Let's talk about who I think, at the very least, can actually win a national title. I don't think it's that many teams. I don't think it's really that many teams every single year, if I'm being totally honest. I think any given year you're probably going to have around 12 teams. I have 13 here, and I felt like I was starting to stretch it, at least towards the end, and we'll get into that as we kind of get through this. But let's go ahead and jump into this, and we'll start with the teams that, the way I kind of went through this, at least in my estimation, is just how many ifs do you have to overcome? If you're a team that has a ton of different, if this quarterback hits, if the transfers on defense come into place the way they like, if this happens, if the coaching changes work out, all of that stuff. If you have more of them, you're going to be a little bit lower on this. If you have less of them, you're going to be higher on this list. And to me, there are two teams that will absolutely be in the conversation that don't have that many ifs, that don't have that many scenarios where, at the very least, they're not in this conversation throughout the year. And to me, that's Penn State and that's Clemson. I think these two teams, at least in my mind, I might not pick them to win the national title right now, but they have the fewest amount of ifs. I think they have the quarterbacks in place with Drew Aller at Penn State and then Cade Klubnik over at Clemson. They have a lot of the pieces around them to work. Clemson has that wide receiver core that is a little bit closer to the Clemson that we're used to. Penn State obviously has maybe the best running back duo in the entire country with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. You have two teams that are going to be in the fight. Now, Clemson needs to take some steps forward defensively. They have TJ Parker. They have Peter Woods. They have Avion Terrell. They have Wade Woodaz and Sammy Brown at linebacker. They have dudes. There's no doubt about that. But they played iffy defense a number of different big-time games, especially that Texas game where they had a chance to win that game. They gave up two 70-yard runs to Jaden Blue that really kind of blew that game open. And that was the big-time difference there. If they can shore up a couple of those spots on the defensive side of the ball and obviously replace Phil Maffa and Jake Burningstool on that offensive side of the ball, they're going to be in this thing. I have a very, very strong feeling that at the very least, we will be talking about Clemson deep into the season as a possible national title winner. Penn State, the exact same. I think you obviously want to see Drew Aller take that next step. You want to see the pass catchers that they brought in around him to be the pass catchers that they need them to be. And you want to see James Franklin make that final step, be the coach that he's kind of lacked to be in a couple of different years. I think he is plenty capable of winning a national title. He just hasn't quite gotten there in his time at Penn State. Got to get over the hump with this team, because if you don't, then I don't know when you're going to get over the hump, if I'm being totally honest with you. But at the end of the day, I do think these teams, almost without a doubt in my mind, will be in the conversation to win a national title. Will they get it done? Who knows? But at the end of the day, I do think these teams have the fewest amount of ifs. And then there's teams to me that are just kind of above question. And I have Texas, Ohio State, and Georgia in this group. I think we could talk about Texas a little bit. Maybe they're not above question to everyone. To me, they're a team that has reloaded at a really, really good level, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And frankly, that's really where I want to zero in on. We'll talk about Arch Manning plenty. We'll talk about the pieces on the outside, and they are replacing a lot of those wide receiver pieces. Have a great running back room with C.J. Baxter coming back into the mix, but the defense is going to be elite. It might be the very best in the country. It might have the best pass rush in the country. it might be a better defense than last year, which sounds crazy to say with a top 10 defense coming off from last year, but Colin Simmons is an absolute freak. That might be the best defensive player. To my money, he is the best edge rusher in the entire country. You obviously have Anthony Hill there. You have Michael Taft coming back on the back end, Malik Muhammad. This defense is going to be suffocating, and I think it's going to keep them in just about every single game they're going to play. And then I think the run game is going to be really solid, especially when you add the Arch Manning kind of aspect to it, where linebackers, defensive ends can't feel as confident just burying it on the run because Arch Manning can pull it and go 67 yards like he did against UTSA. So there's a lot of stuff to like about this Texas team. I think they have a very high floor. I think if they're going to get over the hump, if they're going to win a national title, it's going to come down to number 16. It's going to come down to Arch Manning and how much he can be that difference maker that a lot of people, including myself, think he can end up being. But at the end of the day, that defense is going to keep him in games. They are above question to me. They will be in this conversation almost definitely. Unless there is big-time injury, I think Texas is in that. Ohio State. This is Ohio State. I don't think we need to talk about it too much. They have the two best players in the country as far as I'm concerned. The best offensive player in Jeremiah Smith, the best defensive player in Caleb Downs. I think those are the two guys that are absolute freaks. We'll talk about how that's hurting them a little bit on the recruiting trail right now, but at the end of the day, you're very happy to have those guys in your locker room. They will be ready to go. They will give them a leg up on every other team in the country, including Texas, who they get in week 1. Julian Saint's got to work out. That's the big-time question here. Will Julian Saint work out? Will that new running back duo of C.J. Donaldson and James Peoples come together the way they want to? And then the wide receiver core is going to be totally fine. Max Clare coming in at tight end is going to be an elite player. Cannot wait to see what he can do. Overall, this team's going to be fine. A couple of things changing on defense, but it's Ohio State. I have very little reason to believe this team will not be in the conversation. Might just be able to repeat with those two guys, especially in Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs. And then finally, you got Georgia. Same exact logic of Ohio State. It's Georgia under Kirby Smart. They are going to be in this conversation. They are going to be pushing for this. They might not get there. You know, you look back at last year. It was a down year. They still found a way to win the SEC championship. So they're going to be in this conversation. I promise you that. I think Gunnar Stockton, I don't know why it took me so long. I think Gunnar Stockton is a guy that can bring a lot of really, really great stuff, kind of like we were talking about with Arch Manning. Going to keep these guys a little bit more honest in the run game, which was a huge issue for Georgia last year. He's a guy that can really unload the ball downfield, which I think they were missing just a little bit last year at times. And overall, I think the wide receiver talent's just a little bit better. So to me, those teams are above question. I think there's a lot of things changing. There's a lot of things that do need to come into place for these teams to really get over that hump and be the national title winner. But at the end of the day, they're going to be in that conversation. I think everyone can say that pretty confidently. So those 5 teams, Penn State, Clemson, Texas, Ohio State, Georgia, those are the ones that are kind of setting the pace, at least as far as I'm concerned. And then you get in some teams that, if things come together, they could go really, really right for these teams. And in this grouping, I have 4 teams. I got Oregon, Notre Dame, LSU, and Alabama. Those are the teams that I see that if things come together the right way, they can absolutely win the national title, and in some cases, they could kind of run away with their conference. But let's start with Oregon here, because I think that's kind of an interesting example, because a lot of people would put them above question. A lot of people will put them in kind of the Texas camp, where they've been able to do it at the last couple of years. They continue to improve. They continue to reload what they need to. The difference between them and Texas, at least in my mind, is that a lot of those premium positions, especially on the offensive line, is really where I'm focusing. Oregon had to go outside and get a couple of guys to come in. Texas had guys that were sitting right behind the guys that just went to the NFL that feel plenty ready to play some football. So I think that's the difference, where I tend to lean towards the teams that just have guys filtering in that they've already recruited and have been in the system for a long time. I don't think Oregon's going to have a trouble on the offensive line. I think Isaiah World's incredible. I think Alex Harkey's going to be awesome on the other side of that line. I just think there's a reality where you feel a little bit more confident when you have that recruiting class kind of build up in the offensive line, especially on the lines of scrimmage, rather than go out and get a couple of transfer portal guys, especially guys that are coming from the group of 5 level. So that worries me. Also, the Evan Stewart injury has to worry you. You know, who is that number 1 guy at wide receiver? Do they have that number 1 guy at wide receiver to go with Dante Moore, because he's a new starter? So there's enough things changing over at Oregon comparative to a team like Texas that I dropped them just a little bit below. But let's be honest, if things come together, if Dante Moore is the guy that a lot of his teammates, including Tez Johnson, who just found his way out of there, would say he's going to be, this team's going to be in it. I can almost promise you that. I think they're going to be in the playoff. I feel very confident they're going to be in the playoff at the very least. And then I think they could very well win the national title. I just think they have a couple more things to come into place, especially after that Evan Stewart injury. Then you move over to Notre Dame, a team that it feels like things are moving in the right direction, especially as a program level, but even going into the season. CJ Carr feels like the most talented guy they've had there in a very long time, especially throwing the ball. The wide receivers feel like the most talented they've had in a very long time, at least as far as I can remember, around South Bend. Will it all come together? That's the big time question mark. And frankly, on the defensive side of the ball, losing a guy like Xavier Watts is not easy to replace. Now, they have talent on the back end. Love what Leonard Moore is. Love what Jordan Gray is. Love what a lot of these guys can end up being, or Christian Gray, is. But at the end of the day, it's got to all come together. And that's going to be a very, very tough thing. They're going to have one of the best run games in the country with Jeremiah Love, with Jadarian Price. Can it all come together in the pass game? Because that was the difference last year. In that big-time run they made in the CFP, it was because Riley Leonard made some big-time plays. Jaden Greathouse made some big-time plays at wide receiver. So that's where I'm looking at for Notre Dame. Will that quarterback come into play? Will that pass game come into fruition the way that a lot of people are hoping for? If it does, Notre Dame's going to be right back in a position to possibly make a national title run. Then you get to LSU, and that's a team that I think a lot of people would be a little bit lower on than I am right now. I really like this team. I think Garrett Nussmeier is going to play good football. Will he play consistent football? That's kind of up in the air, but he will at least give you good football. Love the pass catchers, especially Aaron Anderson. Caden Durham is a dude. I think he's going to be incredible this year. I think he's going to add a lot more to that run game. The defense got to make a leap, similar to what they made kind of in the middle of last year. Didn't really make that leap throughout the offseason, but the team that showed up in week 1 was very different than the team that was showing up in week 13. And I think that's kind of the goal for this team, to make that similar type of leap this year. If they do, with Whit Weeks, with Harold Perkins, with Ashton Stamps on the back end, with some of these guys that are going to have to be huge, I think this defense can be at the very least solid. I don't think they're going to be elite, top 10 in the country. I think they very well could be top 30 in the country, top 40 in the country, and that would be plenty, especially with what I expect from this offense. And then you got Alabama. This is a team that it seems to be a lot of people are trying to bury a little bit too early. This is a very, very good football team. Deontay Lawson coming back on the defensive side of the ball. I think everyone's worried about Ty Simpson, and frankly, I am as well. I like him a lot. I think the crew around him is absolutely elite, especially at wide receiver. I have some questions about his ability. I have some questions of his ability to really rise to the level that he's going to need to when you go to Sanford Stadium, when you play LSU at home, when you play these huge games. Is he going to be able to make the game-changing plays that Jalen Milroe had all types of problems with his football game? When he played those big-time games, he would make big plays. That was kind of his MO, and that was kind of the thing that separated him from a lot of guys in the country. Will Ty Simpson be able to do that? He has better things around him, I can promise you that. With Ryan Williams getting a year older, Jeremy Bernard, you have Isaiah Horton coming in from Miami. You have talent all over the place. That won't be an issue, but a little bit worried about the ability at quarterback, a little bit worried if he's going to be able to be the game changer that they're going to need him to be in certain games. And then I worry about that D-line just a little bit. I think they have the talent. I think Quay Rousseau is going to be an absolute beast coming off the edge. I don't necessarily love all of the pieces they have and don't love the depth by any means. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch Alabama. They have plenty of talent. They can absolutely make it happen, and Kalen DeBoer can be a very popular guy in Tuscaloosa. But some things have to come together, especially on that offensive side of the ball, especially at the quarterback position. And then you got the teams that, in my mind, are walking a tightrope. They are probably not going to win the national title. The last two I put on here are questionable, even the way I was putting them down. I'll be totally honest. They might not be walking a tightrope. They might be walking an invisible tightrope. It might be just downright impossible for these last two to do it. But let's start with Ole Miss. Ole Miss is in here. I think they're just uniquely talented. I think Austin Simmons has an absolute cannon. I think he absolutely will have the guys on the outside. Love Caleb Cunningham coming in as a freshman at the wide receiver position. I think Sunshireen Perkins can be a total difference maker for this team. They're going to have the dudes. They're going to have the on-paper talent. Can they put it together over 12 weeks? That's been the big question for Lane Kiffin teams. It has not come to fruition yet. I'd be a little bit surprised if it did this year, if I'm being totally honest. I think this is going to be a good team. I don't think it's going to be a great team, but if I'm looking at teams that can win a national title, you got to go with those teams that have the outright talent, the outright dudes on both lines of scrimmage. I think Ole Miss has those guys. I just think it's going to be really hard to make this happen. Austin Simmons has to be pretty perfect, pretty much from the jump. I just can't picture that happening. So I think Ole Miss is going to be a little bit all over the place this year, but there is that top line ability that possibly gets them into the playoff, and then it's all up for grabs from there. Then you go on to Miami. They have the talent. Once again, they will have the talent to get to this spot. They have one of the best offensive linemen in the country in Francis Mauigoa. They obviously have Carson Beck. If he gets back on track, he can play elite football. I promise him going number 1 overall in the draft wasn't just made up out of thin air. He absolutely is a quarterback that can play some elite football. The defense can take a big-time step forward. This team can do it. They were not all that far from being in the playoff, and frankly, I think you put Cam Ward in those playoff games, he would have done some pretty special things. So at the end of the day, I think Miami can make this happen. Again, a lot of things have to come together. Carson Beck has to play better football. The wide receivers have to be players that I'm not sure if they can step up right now, but JoJo Trader has to be a huge player. A lot of these guys they brought in from the portal have to be big-time hits. And then the defense has to take huge strides for them to win a national title. I wouldn't bet on it, but absolutely a team that has that top-end talent to possibly make it happen. Then you get to the two teams that I put in here because, frankly, I didn't feel good about not having Big 12 teams on here. I don't know if they can do it. I like these two teams enough to think there is a possibility of this happening, and we'll start with Arizona State. They have the quarterback in Sam Leavitt that was just actually voted on as the Offensive Player of the Year going into the year for the Big 12. You have one of the best talents in the entire country in Jordan Tyson at wide receiver. Just got to stay healthy. Have a lot of people returning on the defensive side of the ball that was up and down last year, but if it can find its middle ground, if Xavier Alford on that back end can make some big-time plays, this could be a team that finds it. And I think the other thing to keep in mind here is if Arizona State hits the way that a lot of people expect them to hit, if Sam Leavitt is finding Jordan Tyson every single game, that defense takes a step forward, and losing Cam Scatabo is not the huge blow that a lot of people think it could be, you're in a position where you're going to have a schedule that is very, very doable, that you can get to the end of, still be very healthy, still feel very great, and then go into the playoff and kind of play with reckless abandon, play with nothing to lose, and see where you come out. So I don't know if Arizona State can get this done, frankly. I don't know if they have that top-end talent, especially on the lines of scrimmage, to make this happen. But there is a world here where everything goes right for them, where Sam Leavitt plays at a Heisman level, and they find their way into the playoff feeling really good about themselves, and then they just catch a team on the wrong day. And then I put Texas Tech in here as well. To me, it's the Florida State 2023 model. It's just with a 12-team playoff instead of a 4-team. So can Texas Tech use this absolutely freakish class they've put together with some dudes on the defensive line with Lee Hunter? You also have, I'm blanking on his name right now, David Bailey coming in from Stanford, very talented edge rusher out there. You have some really good guys on the offensive line coming in. You have dudes. You have guys on the lines of scrimmage that are a little bit different than just about everyone else in the Big 12. Maybe Texas Tech, if they can get things to come together offensively, if Baron Morton can play a little bit better football than he has in the past, especially if they can replace Taj Brooks in that run game, this team could be really dangerous, and it could happen in an instant. So Iowa State fans, Kansas State fans, don't be too mad at me. I think it just comes out to the talent level of these two teams. They have that top-end talent that might get closer to the level of a Texas or a Georgia than anyone else in the conference. I still don't think they have a great shot to pull this off, but at the end of the day, I do think those teams, if everything goes right, could find their way to the national title and maybe just lift that trophy. But that's 13 teams, and frankly, I think I'm being a little bit kind. I think there's a couple of teams that I could easily cut off there. I think there's a couple more teams that I could maybe not as easily, but still probably cut off there. Now, left off South Carolina. Love what they can do. Don't love how much they're replacing defensively. Tennessee. I don't imagine Joey Aguilar being the guy that leads the Vols all the way. Indiana, the schedule is going to be a whole lot tougher this year. Illinois, kind of the same thing. Really like the team, but I'm not sure they can put it together for 16 weeks that they're going to have to put it together to win a national title. to me, it's going to be really tough for those Big 12 teams to really find a way to win that national title. I just didn't want to leave them off the list. I wanted to give them a shot at the very least, and I think there is a world where it happens. It's probably a 2007 on steroids type world, but at the end of the day, I'd love to see it happen. It would be awesome to watch. But let's take our first break. Went a little bit long-winded there, but let's take our first break. And when we come back, I just got a question for the SEC, the Big 10, the ACC, and the Big 12. I want to break down what I think is the biggest question as we head into the season for these major conferences. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the teams that I think can actually win a national title. It is very, very hard to put this list together. I had 13 teams on there. I might have been a little bit kind with Arizona State and Texas Tech, but I like to live in the clouds just a little bit as we get closer to college football season. So I got 13 teams. I think you could cut it down to about 10 if I'm being totally honest. So it's going to be a couple of teams that really have a shot. It'll be awesome to see if anyone not on this list would have popped up in my mind, because there's a couple of teams that wouldn't have made the list last year that definitely popped into the list very, very quickly. So we'll get into that obviously as it gets closer. Maybe some teams will pop up during fall camp that I'll have a little bit more confidence in, but as of right now, I feel pretty good with those 13 being the teams that can actually get it done and lift that trophy. But let's get into the biggest questions. For each power conference, I have one big-time question that I think will just define the season. I think one way or another, this question will really define what that conference is and how that conference shakes out this upcoming year. And let's jump into this, and we'll start over in the SEC. To me, it's very, very clear. Which first-year starter is going to step up? Which first-year starter is going to be the game changer that a lot of these guys have been made out to be? Whether you want to talk about Arch Manning at Texas or DJ Lagway, a little bit of a different circumstance, obviously played a little bit last year, but didn't quite get the run that he would have loved to get and that I think a lot of us would have loved to see him get last year. So he's still a relatively new guy. Gunnar Stockton, kind of the same situation there. Ty Simpson, Austin Simmons, a ton of other guys coming in and their first year starting. It's going to be really interesting to watch this, and frankly, you look at the guys, I think it's going to come down to who steps up the biggest. Is Arch Manning going to be the guy that a lot of people are making him out to be? And if he is, it might just be Texas' conference to win, or Texas' conference to lose, frankly. And then if DJ Lagway puts it together, Florida's got a nightmare of a schedule. Frankly, part of the reason they were not in the teams that could win the national title is that schedule, but if DJ Lagway puts it together, that could be a terrifying team that, with that defensive line and DJ Lagway hitting his receivers in stride, could be a very interesting team very quickly. So I think when you talk about the first-year starters, whether you want to bet on Arch Manning or DJ Lagway or Gunnar Stockton or Austin Simmons, it's going to play into how this conference shakes out. I think you have Alabama, you have Texas, you have Georgia. At the very least, those three teams are going to be very much a part of this conversation, and then Florida could very easily be a part of that if Lagway hits. Ole Miss could very easily be a part of that if Austin Simmons hits the way they want. And then you have guys coming in from the portal. Well, Jackson Arnold just kind of moved teams, but Jackson Arnold over at Auburn, you have John Mateer taking his spot at Oklahoma. You have new guys coming in from all over the place, but in my opinion, you have those three guys in particular. You have Arch Manning, you have Ty Simpson, and you have Gunnar Stockton. Those three teams will be in the conversation. Which one of those three quarterbacks will step up in a big way and get their team over the hump? I tend to believe that's the team that's going to win this conference, unless Garrett Nussmeier or Lenora Sellers wants to come in and just ruin the fun for all the first-year starters. Very much on the table for them to rain on the youngins' parade. But at the end of the day, I do think this is going to define the conference. Does Arch Manning step up in a big way? If so, it's probably Texas's conference. If Gunnar Stockton steps up in a big way, it's going to be Georgia's conference. If none of them step up, it's probably going to be LSU or maybe even South Carolina. So a lot of things going into play here, but in the way I'm looking at the SEC right now is a whole lot of teams are introducing new guys as their starting quarterback. Which one hits, and if they hit, or is that team just the far and away favorite to win this conference? Moving over to the Big Ten, it's as simple as is Penn State ready to take over? I love this conference. I think it's going to be a really intense conference. I think it's going to be very competitive. When I look at Penn State, they are the best on paper. They have the team that has the most returning starters. They are the team that I feel probably the best and most stable about what they have at quarterback. They have the run game to go along with it. They upgraded in my mind, at defensive coordinator and at the wide receiver core, the two places that they probably needed to upgrade the most. And then you have they're 25th in the country in returning production, top 10 in offensive returning production. The team has a runway in the schedule to kind of get going and get everything under their feet. This is the chance that Penn State has. It's very, very simple. Penn State is in a position where not only are you set up as well as you've been set up in a very long time, Ohio State's not set up in as great of a spot as they have been in the last 5 years. Now, Ohio State's going to be Ohio State, but breaking in Julian Say and having a lot of guys on that defense have to step up in big ways and a lot of moving parts on those defense, it's going to change a lot of things. There's no doubt about that. Oregon, breaking in a new starting quarterback, just had probably their best offensive player injured in Evan Stewart. There's an opening here, and there's an opening where Penn State's going to be able to play really good football. If Penn State is able to take the steps forward in the pass game the way that they hope to with these new wide receivers, in the defensive side of the ball, especially the defensive backfield, if they can take a step forward there, they are going to be the team to beat in this conference. Now, Ohio State is going to be part of this conversation. So is Oregon, Indiana, Illinois, maybe even Michigan will get in on this conversation. But the reality is, if Penn State is ready to take over, if Penn State is ready to take the steps forward that they've been kind of waiting and taking their time to take the last couple of years, they're going to be the team to beat, and I think everyone else is playing for second. I know that sounds crazy to say with a Penn State team that hasn't gotten over that hump in a very, very long time, but this team has just about everything in place while the rest of the conference is looking around trying to figure out quite a few things. So the way that I look at this, if Penn State's ready to step up, if they make the steps forward that a lot of us expect them to make, I think it's Penn State's conference to lose, frankly. And that sounds crazy saying because it's been Ohio State's for a long time. It's been Michigan's for a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think this is Penn State's year. I think if they put it together, if they're ready to take over, I think it's Penn State's conference, no doubt about it. Then you move over to the Big 12, and it's the question that we'll probably have every single year going forward. How many teams aren't in this thing? How many teams are not in the race to win this conference? Because, frankly, if you asked me last year, I probably would have left Arizona State off this list. I probably would have said they genuinely do not have a shot to win this conference. They won the conference, so I have no earthly idea how many teams are actually in this thing. What I can tell you is 7 teams are plus 1,000 or better to win this conference. It's all over the place. Whether you want to talk about Arizona State or Kansas State returning Avery Johnson. I don't know why I blanked on that name. Kansas State. You have Iowa State, obviously coming back with Rocco Beckton. A lot of really, really great pieces over there in Ames. You have a number of other teams. You have Utah bringing in Devin Dampier. A lot of really good teams in this conference. And a lot of teams that are right around each other. TCU with Josh Hoover, who's going to be a really interesting team. And then right below those 7 teams, Baylor, another one up there that absolutely will have something to say about this conference. And then right below that, you have Kansas and Jalen Daniels, a guy that can take over just about any second he wants and be a total difference maker in 2 seconds. He's an absolute beast and someone that can take over this conference. Now, I don't know if I'm betting on him to, but at the end of the day, we saw what happened when he was fully healthy and really got his feet under him last year. They went on a 4-game win streak where they beat 3 ranked opponents. They are going to be a good team and definitely a team that can make it happen. And then the rest of the conference is kind of up for grabs. You know, can Colorado find it and really put it together for the second year in a row with Dion? Can Houston's portal class really hit kind of an Arizona State level last year? Can they get Connor Wegman going? Can they get Tanner Koziel being the top tight end in the conference? Rich Rod, can he bring magic back to Morgantown? Could Scott Frost do that in the bounce house? I know some people are picking that. I wouldn't pick that if I'm being totally honest, but at the end of the day, I see 8 that are really, really in it. 8 teams that are absolutely, without a doubt, going to be in this conversation deep into the season. And then you have a Cincinnati, you have a Houston, you have a Colorado that, if the perfect situation plays out, maybe they can put it together. So right now I can say 11 teams can win this conference. I probably wouldn't have included Arizona State. As I said earlier, I probably wouldn't have included them if you asked me last year who can win this conference. So what do I know? What does anyone know about the Big 12 right about now? I know a lot of teams are in it. I can tell you that. And a lot of teams will have their fair share to say about what the Big 12 is this year. And I can't wait to watch it all unfold. But finally, we got to get over to the ACC. And very similar to the Big 10 question, just a little bit more aggressive. Is it Clemson and everyone else? Is it just Clemson's conference and everyone else is just playing for who gets to play Clemson and Charlotte? Is it everyone just trying to play for another CFP spot while losing to Clemson? Is that the dynamic of this conference? Or is it a little bit more even-keeled than we're thinking right now? Because Clemson is replacing some guys. You know, Phil Maffa is a huge player for that team that they're having to replace. Obviously, Jake Burningstool going to be a huge player. They have to replace some guys on defense that walked out the door. It'll be a different team. It just feels like Clemson is the best team in this conference, and it might be by a margin. Now, obviously, Miami will have the best shot to pull this off. They have the type of dudes that Clemson has. Now, I don't know if they have them in droves the way that Clemson has, but I do think that Miami, at least from a physical perspective, matches up the best. And then Carson Beck's got to rise to the moment. Will they be able to handle Peter Woods and TJ Parker if they were to play them? A lot of different moving parts there. Miami, obviously, going to be the team that has the best shot. Louisville, another team to watch for sure. You have Miller Moss coming in. Jeff Brom has been a little bit tough on Clemson, especially last year. They went into Clemson and beat the crap out of that team. One way or another, they really beat the crap out of that team from tip to tail, and I think now you look forward and it's really hard to doubt what Louisville can be. Georgia Tech, another team that a lot of people are watching right now, maybe watching just a little bit too much. It's always that time of year when you start talking about sleepers, and the more you talk about one team being a sleeper, they become not a sleeper, but at the end of the day, they do play Clemson in Atlanta in week 3, and maybe Georgia Tech wins that one. And if they do, then this conference is totally turned on its head. And then obviously you have SMU with Kevin Jennings coming back. Now, they're replacing some guys that I think are massive for that team, and we'll get into some more details, obviously, over the next couple of weeks. But SMU will be in that conversation. Can Pitt put it together with Eli Holstein? Can Florida State put it together with Thomas Castellanos? Because he's talking a lot, I'll tell you that. If he is as good as he talks, that team could definitely play for an ACC championship. I don't expect that to happen, but at the end of the day, there are plenty of dark horses in this conference. It just feels like Clemson is setting the pace by about 20 meters. Now, I don't know if someone can close the gap, and I don't know if Georgia Tech will just trip them up in week 3, but at the end of the day, it feels like it's Clemson and everyone else. That could change in a hurry, but we'll find that out pretty quickly, and I think right now, I would bet on Clemson pretty aggressively in the ACC. There's plenty of teams right around them that could make that very questionable very quickly. So a lot of questions as we head into these power conference seasons, because these are going to be weird conferences. I think the SEC, what is the dominant team? I think a lot of people are tabbing Texas, but I think they're betting on Arch Manning to be the guy that a lot of people have made him out to be. Will he end up being that guy is the big time question. In the ACC, is it just Clemson and everyone else? You have Penn State. Are they ready to make the big time step forward? And then just who can win the Big 12? How many teams can't win the Big 12? Frankly, there might be no one that can't win it in that conference. It is so all over the place that I wouldn't bet against anyone. But going to be awesome to watch all of this unfold. Obviously, we'll get into a couple more micro questions as we get into a little bit more of a micro look at these conferences. But at the end of the day, let's take a little bit of a break here, and then we got to talk about recruiting. It's been blowing up the last little bit, and a big time story out of Lubbock that we'll be talking about right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the biggest questions I have for the power conferences, a lot of different stuff going on. Obviously with the SEC, will one of those young quarterbacks step up? Will Arch Manning, Gunnar Stockton, maybe Austin Simmons even, over there in Oxford step up in a big way? And that might just define that conference. But we got some big stuff to get into, and we gotta talk about recruiting. It's been going absolutely crazy, as it does right around this time of year, just about every single year, but we got some big time stories to talk about, and I think weirdly enough, we got to start in Lubbock, Texas. I think this might be the first time that a lot of people have started their recruiting talk in Lubbock, Texas, but the Felix Ojo saga has been something to watch over the last little bit. Felix Ojo, the number one offensive tackle in the country, at least according to 24/7. He has committed to Texas Tech. It looks like the rev sharing deal is going to be 3 years, $5.1 million, fully guaranteed. So kind of the first time we've seen this. Now, there's been other deals that have been kind of a little bit less publicized than this that we'll talk about actually a little bit later in this segment, but at the end of the day, this is a huge deal. There's no two ways about it, and it's a huge deal for a number of reasons, and one of them we can get into maybe on Friday in a little bit more depth because we talked about it when we were talking about the house settlement. How enforceable are these rules? Is Texas Tech thinking that these rules are enforceable? I think has a lot to do with this conversation because they have a lot of money tied up, whether it's with Felix Ojo or some of the guys they just brought in from the portal. They have a lot of that, hypothetically, $15 million that they would have to dole out to their football team already kind of locked up for the next couple of seasons. Are they thinking that they only have $15 million, or are they thinking that these rules don't mean too much and we can probably spend whatever money we want? That'll kind of come out in the next 6 months. But at the end of the day, regardless of that, because at the end of the day, that is kind of nebulous to me. That doesn't much matter, if I'm being totally honest, because the reality is there's a lot of teams on both sides of that fence. There's some teams that are fully playing by the rules because they think they will hold up. There's some teams that are tiptoeing around it just a little bit because they don't think the rules will hold up, or at the very least, they won't kick in until a little bit later down the road as they kind of iron out the details. At the very least, I tend to think Texas Tech is just trying to make as much stuff happen before everything is set in stone. But at the end of the day, you got a really good player. And you got a player that everyone knows the price tag of. They know it's $5.1 million over the next 3 years. The guy better be ready to roll. I can tell you that much. And there's been a lot of talk of they're just buying this kid. And frankly, they weren't the finalists in the final couple of days. This was kind of talked about among Texas insiders, among Ohio State insiders that were kind of leading this recruitment. They kind of knew this was going to happen. But going into it, he wasn't. Texas Tech was not on the finalist list. I believe it was Florida, Ohio State, Texas, and Tennessee. I could be wrong about that. But regardless, Texas and Ohio State, most likely Texas, was going to win this recruitment. And then Texas Tech comes in with a huge offer. Obviously not something that we love to see, but let's be totally honest. If you paid me $5.1 million to go play for Joey McGuire, I'm sprinting to Lubbock. I love Joey McGuire. There is no question that he is very, very good at putting together those relationships. So while this was a big-time price tag, and I don't think he ends up at Texas Tech without the big price tag, I think they have a plenty good relationship. I don't think you should take away from this that he was totally bought. I do think that changed the game. I can tell you that much pretty confidently. But at the end of the day, everyone knows what the price tag is. He better come ready. He's a very, very toolsy guy. 6'7", only about 270-ish right now, so has to put on about 35, 40 pounds if he really wants to play right away at a high level. But he better be ready to play at a high level. I can promise you that, because now it's no longer, you hear whispers of what the price tag is. Everyone knows what the price tag is. You're making $1.7 million the second you step on campus. You better be playing really good football the second you step on campus. So it's going to be really interesting to watch. Huge kudos to Texas Tech for getting this done. You can be mad about the way they got it done, but at the end of the day, they got a really good player. And if they're able to make this happen and make the money work, then more power to them, because about 11% of their revenue share is going to be tied up with this dude going over the next couple of years. That could get sketchy, depending on how they see the next couple of years going. But at the end of the day, that's something we can get into in a little bit more brass tack later on. But a lot of teams are playing fast and loose with how the house settlement works right about now. But let's get into the ridiculous run that Georgia was on in June and might just continue to be on, frankly. In the last 42, 41 days, something like that, they've added 20 commits. And they had 19 guys that have added to their 2026 class, did add one guy to their 2027 very talented corner that we can talk about a little bit down the road. But Jared Curtis obviously leads this class, the only 5-star in this class right now. I tend to believe a lot of these guys will be or could be 5-stars, so not super worried about it. James Johnson, an incredible player from down in Miami. Justin Fitzpatrick, very talented corner. Braden Fogel, really good tight end, a guy that is going to be very talented, kind of on the outside, a little bit more of a Brock Bowers, not necessarily an inline guy, but very, very toolsy, very talented, very fast for a tight end. He is going to be a big-time player for them down the road, as a lot of tight ends are. And then Chase Calicut, a guy I really, really like that Texas very much wanted. I can promise you that. And Georgia, I think, feels pretty good taking that guy away from Texas, but very talented corner that absolutely will be a piece for Georgia going forward. And I think Georgia's done a really good job kind of adapting to the new circumstances, because I don't think they ever really changed during the NIL era. Now, they offered money. I'm not here to tell you that Georgia never offered money or never got into any bidding wars. I'm telling you they had a lower ceiling than a lot of teams. They were not going to get into the crazy bidding wars that went over $1.5 million or anything crazy. They were able to kind of just go about their business, and they still recruited at a high level. Now they're just back to playing the same game as everyone else and being at a very, very high level. So I think they're going to end with a top 5 class at the very least. I believe they're number 2 right now over a 247, so they're going to recruit at a high level no matter what the circumstances are, but feels like the sport's coming back to Georgia just a little bit, coming back to Kirby Smart, and I think they're fully ready to get this thing going. I think they might just have a full class right about now. They'll probably add a couple more guys here and there. Caden Prothro is someone to watch. Obviously, another tight end that they might just add that could play wide receiver at the next level, but regardless, they could add a couple more guys. They pretty much got their class put together. They got 27 guys right now. If they add a couple more guys, get up to around 30, I think they'll be more than fine, and hopefully just hold on to those guys and sign them at the end of the run. But remarkable June for Kirby Smart in Georgia, and they might just add a couple more guys in July. And then Notre Dame. The approach is very, very obvious. It seems from Notre Dame on the recruiting trail, just find the NFL legends, go call their kids, because they have Devin Fitzgerald, Larry Fitzgerald's son. They have Caden Finley, Jermichael Finley's son. They have Thomas Davis Jr., Thomas Davis's son, all in this 26 class alone. In the last couple of classes, they've gotten Plaxico Burress's kid. They've gotten Jerome Bettis's kid. C.J. Carr's, Lloyd Carr's grandson. It is a ridiculous thing that Marcus Freeman is doing, where he's just getting guys with the right genes, and frankly, I do not blame him one bit. These are very, very talented guys. Really love what Caden Finley can end up being. Very talented guy, a guy that has remarkable head on his shoulders that I think has been really, really evident over his recruitment. And you just got dudes. You know you have dudes because you've seen what their dads can do. You know what they have in them, and you just got to get it out of them. I think all of these guys are plenty talented right now. I think they understand that they can hit that next level at Notre Dame, and they're number 4th overall in the recruiting rankings right now. Don't necessarily have that quarterback to go in this class, but frankly, I don't think they're worried about 2026. I think they love C.J. Carr, and I think they feel very confident about him going into 2026, and then they'll figure out the quarterback situation from there. They did have Deuce Knight for a minute. That went sideways pretty quickly. But at the end of the day, Notre Dame just continues to fire on all cylinders. It's been remarkable what they've been able to do after losing Brian Kelly, and we'll talk about losing their GM to the team we'll talk about here in a second, but remarkable stuff from Marcus Freeman. He's such a talented guy that you can't deny at this point. He is going to be a very, very long stalwart in this sport, probably at Notre Dame, probably winning national titles here pretty soon, and it might just be with a couple NFL legends on the sideline. And then we got to talk about USC, the team that actually took the GM from Notre Dame, Chad Bowden, one of the most special guys in this sport that you do not know the name of probably. He is a guy that behind the scenes everyone talks about. And behind the scenes they were saying Notre Dame just lost a guy that could tank their class. Obviously it didn't. They're doing more than fine with the class they have right now. But Chad Bowden found his way down to Southern California, and Mark Bowman came right after him. A remarkable talent that has an insane NIL deal just like Felix Ojo, maybe even more insane. It sounds like it might be $8 million over the next 3 years for that tight end. Now, he might be a Brock Bowers level talent, so keep that in mind. He might be an absolute freak that can make all the difference in that offense. Doesn't change that there's a lot of money to go around, and it'll be really interesting to watch that kind of develop over the next little bit, because USC might be playing outside the rules as well. But at the end of the day, we'll see how that develops. That's something we can talk about in more detail, but a pretty crazy deal for a tight end, I can promise you that. And on the D-line and O-line, they're recruiting at a very high level. Kenny Pepe might be the very best offensive lineman in the entire country. Jamian Winfield on the defensive line is downright elite. they're putting it together. They're doing exactly what they need to do. Now, will they put it all together in the speed that they need to is kind of the big question, because the clock is ticking just a little bit for Lincoln Riley. Now, I don't think this year he's in danger or anything like that. I think next year he could be pretty quickly. I'll just leave it at that for now, but I love what this program's doing. I love the changes they've made at the coordinator position. I love the changes they made in the recruiting perspective. Just love the way that Lincoln Riley's talking. As he gets into the season, we'll see if it makes a big time difference. Maybe it won't. Maybe they're the team to watch as a kind of dark horse to make the CFP. So we'll figure all that out in time. But on the recruiting trail, USC is doing exactly what they need to do to be USC again, at least the USC that we're all comfortable with. Alabama just stockpiling 5 stars. It is absolutely ridiculous what Kalen DeBoer is doing down there in Tuscaloosa, and a lot of people are really angry about this one. They're saying Nick Saban's coming back and doing all the recruiting for them. I'll put this very, very plainly. If Kalen DeBoer did not use Nick Saban in recruiting, he should be fired. I mean that very, very plainly. If he does not use the greatest coach of all time, the guy that when he walks into the room, every single person knows exactly who he is. They turn to his direction. They stop talking. They let him talk. If he does not use that person in recruiting, he's the dumbest person alive. He should not be coaching at Alabama. He shouldn't even be coaching college football. And I know Kalen DeBoer is not that dumb. He was obviously going to use Nick Saban in recruiting. The other part, if you think Nick Saban is why these guys are committing to Alabama, you are out of your mind. Kalen DeBoer has done an incredible job building out that staff. You obviously have Ryan Grubb coming back into the mix. You add guys like Xavier Griffin at linebacker, an absolute freak that has tons of Alabama ties. Sadarian Morgan from Alabama. They weren't letting them leave the state. They definitely should not have let him leave the state, and they were able to hold on to him. An incredible wide receiver. Jordan Edmonds at corner. You have Jarius Edwards at safety that is an absolute terrifying individual. A huge, huge guy that will come down and lay an absolute lick on you. Incredible player. And then you have Xavier Crowell, Nolan Wilson, a lot of really, really talented guys, and a lot of people that said Kalen DeBoer would not be able to recruit in the Southeast. They're deleting some tweets. Let's just put it that way. At the end of the day, they can put it off as Nick Saban's recruiting. They can put it off as, well, it's Alabama. Of course anyone can recruit there. He's getting the job done at a very, very high level. I believe they have 5 stars some places. They have 4 in some other places. So if you're an Alabama fan, maybe lean towards On 3. I believe you got 5 stars there. If you're an Auburn fan, maybe lean towards 247 because they only have 4 there. And regardless, if you're an Auburn fan, you're not going to like what you see on those sites because it's a little bit nasty down there in Auburn, Alabama. And that's something we can get into in a little bit of time. But some other little things I wanted to hit here. Maybe we'll start talking about Auburn here in a second, but did want to talk about this here very, very quickly. Very, very huge commitment for Syracuse. 5-star wide receiver, incredibly talented guy that probably wouldn't go into Syracuse if Fran Brown wasn't there. That is what Fran Brown brings to this program, a remarkable player that absolutely will have an impact for this team, will absolutely make some big-time plays here pretty soon. I can almost promise you that. Very talented kid and cannot wait to see what Syracuse can do. This is the biggest recruit they've gotten in a very long time, and it looks like he's going to be huge for them very, very quickly. A lot will take shape over the next 46 days. Auburn's got a lot to figure out. I can promise you that. Hugh Freeze is getting pieces wrote about him in Golf Digest, which is never a good sign about how things are going around your program. Overall, we'll watch this very closely over the next little bit. We'll do some segments here and there talking about recruiting because a lot of commitments coming down the pipe. I can promise you that. A lot of different guys that will be committing, a lot of different classes that will be taking pretty good shape. I think we all understand at this point, around the end of August is when you have pretty set classes. Now, obviously, there will be some guys that will commit late. There will be some guys that will flip late and all that great stuff. But at the end of the day, around this time is when you really start to solidify your class. I think Texas has a little bit of work to do on the trail. Ohio State fans are upset about the amount of money they're able to spend right about now, and we can get into that in time. Auburn, we've talked about a little bit. There's a lot of different things that have to happen, and if they don't, then some of these teams could be in a bad place going forward. But at the end of the day, we're 46 days out from football happening. We're 46 days out from the best time of the year, and we are going to start heating up the content even more. I will be back here on Friday. We're going to talk about breakout candidates. We're going to get into some media day stuff. We'll talk about a lot of different things on Friday. Haven't fully set that in stone yet, but at the end of the day, we'll get into all of that craziness. There's media days going on right now for the Big 12. We'll get into all of it on Friday, I can promise you that. But thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, do all of that great stuff. Comment any questions you have. I can put them into Friday's show. But overall, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys on Friday.